Okay, hello guys. My name is I'm Apple Slayer. You've probably seen me, and I'm going to be making a new series. This series is going to be about how to run a government. Now, many of you are probably wondering these questions I put up, like what makes a government work? How can I change the government? Why is the government important? Who should have power in the government? Yada 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 yada. Well, the thing is, you can't really determine an answer to most of those questions unless you know history about government and what makes a government work, which is I actually think is one of the questions. Now, when you start thinking about like why are the U.S. government so okay, I guess you come into a few problems. You don't know why the U.S. government is like it is, and I'm gonna tell you this: the U.S. government used to be great. So, basically, this series is just gonna teach you about how government runs in the history of some types of governments. And so this episode is going to be mainly driven by history, because history is kind of important when you talk about, like, making new history. So, let's get started. So now, what was the first government you think you can know? Now, many of you may disagree, but the first government was tribal government. It's just the Indians and, like, not the Indians, but it was tribal government. And you know what? That was actually no matter what anybody says, it was a largely successful government. But you have to ask a deeper question: why did that government start? Why did people start saying, let's get into tribes and let's kill animals to survive? Well, it's simple: fear. Was the first driving force. And you're probably thinking, like, fear? I don't think fear started governments. Well, we'll get to that. Now, fear is a big driving force. And by driving force, I mean a force that drives people to do government and other stuff. So fear. Well, the reason why people formed tribal governments was because they feared the main thing of all: death. Pretty broad. I'll admit myself. Death, starvation, hunger. Well, I can't spell either. That's a fail. That's not right either. G. And that's hunger. Hungry. I'm a fail speller and I can't write or draw. But mainly, people feared death above all else. Because, to be quite honest, people don't like to die. I don't want to die. I don't think many of you want to die. So that's very important to starting these first tribal governments is fear. Fear is like pretty big in every society and every government now. So people got together and said, well, if we work together, we won't die, and not dying is pretty good. I think not dying is good too. I don't know if you agree. You could, probably. But not dying was pretty good. And the only difficult thing was that if we work together, we live longer. And living longer is always better. Well, it's not always. But moving on. So now you have these people saying, well, we're going to work together to get food, because we don't like to starve. So food is like a pretty big driving force in government. No food, no government. I guarantee it. You starved everyone in the U.S. for 3 days, they would be revolting like maniacs. And that's not a joke. So, tribal governments, you had a bunch of people saying, we want to work together because we want to live longer and eat better. Because they had some pretty measly diets. It was pretty much plants, squirrel meat, and deer. Probably not deer, but you get the point. It's not fun to eat like that. So what they did was they say, we'll work together, so as one group. However, they ran into a problem. They didn't understand democracy, which I'm just going to call demo. Democracy is pretty important nowadays, like in the U.S. Not really, but basically they didn't understand that, and so they said, well, we'll have someone to lead us in the hunts, and we're going to make a way to elect that person to be great. Now, they had a few rules. Big rule back then was that he had to be strong and smart. Now, nowadays, we don't really care whether he's strong or not, because we're not going to hunt buffalo out in the fields anymore. But nowadays, we care about this one. They're smart. If your elected official is not smart, you got problems. Big problems. Because no one likes a stupid elected official because they have no clue what they're doing. So, those are basically everything that went into electing him. He had to be strong to lead the hunts. And he had to be smart enough not to let people die from failed hunts. So now you understand that, we're gonna move on a little bit. So they had these tribal governments, and they were relatively successful. They made sure the human race didn't die, which is, I consider, pretty important. Now, this is what we start to see. We started to see the first social pyramid. Now, this pyramid was pretty simple. People on the bottom and people on the top. Except there's only one person on the top because they only needed one leader. And we have one more problem with this system, however. In this system, people at the top were below this person, so he probably ate first and was given more, however he had to do more stuff. However, let's say he was a bad leader. He always had failed hunts, which was big in then because people like to eat. So he was bad. He was just terrible. He was a terrible person. Well, you want to know what? You want to know what happened to bad people? They ended up like Charles I. For all of you that don't know who Charles I was, he was the King of England. I forget when the period was. He was King of England, and he was a pretty bad leader. And you know what happened to him? He got his head chopped off. And that's how this happened. If they didn't like the guy, they killed the guy. Which, in most cases, could be very good. Sometimes could be very bad, considering you just killed a person and you lost the leader in your tribe. So, and then they had problems with this system. If they killed the guy that was here, well, who takes his place? Well, they said the strongest guy, and the strongest and smartest guy. Well, they just killed the strongest and smartest guy. So they needed to elect another person among themselves. And this guy was so lucky to be the strongest, but these guys wanted to eat first because they felt that, like, we want food. They might X him out. They might kill him. And this was a key flaw in this type of system. There was no way to easily transition of power. And that's a big thing. If you can't, throughout the time, if you can't have a peaceful transition of power, watch me spell this. Translation. Let me work on my spelling. But if you can't peacefully transfer into another leader, you got problems. Because what happens then is that you have a civil war, and with civil wars, you kill people. And the population of your government decreases a lot. And that was a problem back then, because there was probably only around 10,000 people. And if you lose 900 of them, or 9,000 of them, you just lost a majority of the human race, and they could ultimately die. Well, people being, even though they couldn't really spell or do literature or math, were still pretty smart. They realized that we can't kill each other We need to form a government that actually works. But the thing about this was that there was also technology that was catching up with these people. And this technology was agriculture, farms. And this was very important. And out of the most important discoveries ever, I'd say agriculture, definitely the most important discovery ever. No, you can't imagine. Because farming gives food, and food makes people happy. However, farming only gives food not the whole year. You might get, we'll say, 2 or 3 harvests each season, but there's a calendar of time. There's time when you're not getting food from your crops and just have to grow them, and the time you get food from your crops are rather small. So, but the amount you get at that time is big. So people realize that, well, if we got people elected or got government officials, maybe they could figure out ways to hold together society when there's no food being produced. And the solution government officials agreed to was storage. We don't need all our food then. We eat it during the times we don't need it. So if we eat it all now, we won't have any and we'll kill each other. But if we eat just a little bit now and a little bit till our next harvest time, we'll have plenty. And in fact, this system is actually so successful, it led to the first town or city. And that first town or city, I'm not going to try and spell because I'll mess up terribly, is Califuyak. Probably pronounced it wrong, too. But basically, this was the first town. Not really quite a city yet, but it was the first rural town. Now, in this system, you also had a new thing coming about, and that was artisans. Artisans could now make things, and those things could be sold to each other, so not everyone had to get food. Which is basically how our government, and like everything progressed. So if you don't always have to worry about food, and you can worry about things like pots or something. It's probably a big thing back then. Pots, not like the cannabis, but like normal pots, because they could be used to store food. Well, you have a new industry starting, and what can you do with clay industry? Well, you can go on to building industries, where you can build buildings that you can live in, and that's pretty important, since I don't think everyone lived in teepee when they farmed, because that would just be awful. So, and that's basically how our society started to progress. Now, as the human population continued, some things happened. There was a new hierarchy, a new social pyramid was forming. You had your main leader, or leaders, depending, and you might have a few leaders. You might also have the now this pyramid's gonna be a little bit wonky because I'm not gonna draw a top thing because it's not quite that type of pyramid. You might have church people, or not like Catholic church, but like random religion churches that say if we worship the gods, gods will give us food. And you might have artisans. Or no, not even there. You'll have farmers here, farmers are so pretty important because food is very important. So you have farmers, and then you have artisans. In fact, that's probably not even how it looked. If I was going to draw a population map, it'd probably look something like this. Population plus importance. Now, see, it's very, very wonky to draw. So this is going to be population plus importance. You have farmers here. You have artisans here. And then you have church people that ran the government here. Now, the first type of government is the Mesopotamian government that I'm going to be talking about. And this was basically it was really run by the church. So now you have these artisans and farmers that are producing stuff, and so trade starts happening. Now trade is how some governments make money today. However, trade back then, if a government tried to intervene and take a cut of money out of that trade, what would happen is that government would be killed. They're dead. People would kill them because there's a few things mess with back then, and one was what people had, so property, and two was your wife. You never mess with a man's wife. That's not cool, dude. And a third one, realistically, which I actually just forgot, would be property, wife, and then his freedom. You don't mess with people's freedom. That makes people angry. I'm gonna be quite honest here. So those are three things you should never mess with. I'm pretty sure they're I think there's supposed to be four, but those are three things that you shouldn't mess with. And let me see how I'm doing with time. Wow, this video is going fast. Okay, so basically, this type of government was great. You had food, and it was still pretty fair because everyone got to eat food, and everyone pretty much lived. It also did not go with a currency system. It went with bantering, which was okay, I guess, but life went on. And so now I'm almost done, guys. Don't worry. So now, with the smarter class of farmers and people ruling, new things begin to happen. There was people with, where they had food, and people without. Now, I think some of you may see where I'm going with. Now, if you don't have food, you want to get food. So what do? You go to war. And the reasons why they didn't have food was not because they had infertile lands, because usually where they had, like those city-states that I'm now talking about, like Sumer and Ur, they had land, they had food, and they could produce food. However, what most likely happened is they had an inefficient government, and a good way, or an ineffective, we're going to go with, so I can spell that, an ineffective government. Now, ineffective governments have an easy way to make themselves effective, and that's war. War is a terrible idea, because now you need to take more people away from food production, which is what the problem was originally about, and send them off to kill people with food production and steal their food. And that's basically how war probably started. I can't say I'm factually correct, because I'm not factually correct. There's probably some other forces driving it. But that's basically how it went. Now, smarter people realized that if we had effective government, we don't need war, and they could and enjoy themselves and go do other stuff, which is key in any government. And so, based on time, I'm probably going to stop right now. But just remember, but oh god, I'm slurring now. So people came together because of fear of death, and food made them happy because they got to live. So they teamed up together to make the successful government of that time. And there's also a bunch of other things governments can do, like build buildings, pyramids, and all crazy stuff. But for now, that's pretty much all governments were about. Survival.